and you can have a seat. Welcome. It is so good to have you. If you are new here, my name is Brandon. I get an awesome responsibility and privilege of being one of the pastors here on staff. We are so grateful that you showed up today and chose to worship with us. Today we're kicking off the second week of a series called Dollars and Cents. See what we did there with that? Dollars and cents. Are you tracking with me? Is anybody home? Knock, knock. All right, we're good. Dollars and cents. Now, here's the issue that many people have when they show up to a church and the church is talking about money. The lens in which many people view this is, okay, so what are you wanting from me? I show up to a church service and lo and behold, they're talking about money. They need something from me. And so there's a statement we made last week that I just want to revisit this week so you understand kind of our thoughts behind this series and our hope for this series. Here's what we said last week. Managing money well is something we want for you, not from you. Let me say that again. Managing money well is something we want for you, not from you. All right, dream with me just for a moment. What if money was not a source of stress and anxiety? I mean, think about it. Statistically speaking, stress and anxiety about finances is the number one stressor in every household in America. So what if we didn't have stress and anxiety when we thought about our finances? We looked at a stat last week that said 57% of divorced couples attributed money fights as their number one issue. What if money and finances were not straining our marriages, our friendships, our relationships? What if you had zero debt? You did not owe one penny to one person or to one company. Think about that. What if the only thing you owed to others was love? No debt. Now, can you imagine how freeing that would be? Right? If I wasn't stressed out, my marriage wasn't being strained by money or finances, I didn't have any debt, I had a lot of freedom. That's our hope for you in this series. Our hope for you is that you would not have stress, not anxiety, no stress in your marriage, and that you would have freedom and peace. So we think this is really important to talk about. It's something we want for you, not from you. And last week we began the conversation like this. If you want to manage money well, it's actually going to begin not with us just simply giving you tools of how to do that well. It's actually going to begin with your heart. Jesus was pretty clear that how you and I manage money and stuff, it always goes back to the heart. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So in other words, where your stuff is, that's where your heart is. And of course, the heart in a biblical sense is kind of the centerpiece of you. It's where we think, we will, we long, we desire, we make decisions in our heart. And Jesus says, wherever your treasure is, if you're storing up treasure here on earth, you know, in homes and cars and stuff, the latest gadget, your heart is going to be right there with it. But you have another choice, another option. You could store up treasure in heaven. It never fades, it never goes away. And of course, your heart is with the kingdom. So if we're ever gonna manage money well, we have to be very mindful that it's a heart issue, first and foremost. Now today, we're gonna continue to kind of set the table, if you will. You know, if you're having a group of guests over, one of the things you wanna do well is kind of set the table before the food ever arrives. So we're gonna get to the tools, and over the next 3 weeks, we're gonna talk about how do you actually manage money well? What's a good plan? And by the way, we're kicking off 7 financial peace groups. If you're not in one of those groups, I would say that will resource you with all the tools you need to manage money well. As you leave here today, you can sign up for one of those groups. We're gonna help give you tools even on Sunday. But really, if you don't have the right perspective, you've failed to set up the table correctly. So yes, it begins with our heart, but there's another truth that we have to understand and resonate with. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14. Let me give you a little bit of context of where we're jumping in. Matthew is one of the Gospels, so one of the stories, accounts of Jesus' life. We're the tail end of Jesus' life here in this particular passage. And Jesus is talking to his disciples about his eventual return. Jesus already told his disciples, hey, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to die at the hands of the leaders. They're going to kill me 3 days later. I'm going to rise from the dead. I'm going to conquer Satan, hell, death, and sin. And then I'm going to go back to the Father. But that's not the end of the redemptive story. The end of the redemptive story is I come back. And my kingdom will be complete and fully realized when I come back. And so he's speaking in the context of his eventual return. And he tells 3 stories or 3 parables. The first is found in the first part of Matthew 25. He talks about these 10 virgins. You can go read that. Then he's going to talk about the story that we're going to examine today. And finally, he's going to talk about the sheep and the goats. How at the end of time, God's going to separate people. So this is really important to understand. As we prepare for what will happen, Jesus' return, how do we prepare well? How are we faithful in preparing for his return? And this is what Jesus says. Verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. So he's talking about the kingdom of heaven. He's like, I want to tell you a little story, a parable. It's like this. It's like a master who had servants, and he's going to entrust his property to these servants. And listen to how they handled his property. Verse 15. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. And then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had the 5 talents came forward, bringing the 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. And his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to him who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place, there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So again, Jesus often taught through stories or parables. They're really memorable when we learn through stories. And so Jesus tells this story of these 3 servants and this master. Now, whenever you read a parable, often you have to identify in the story, okay, who are we and who is God in the story? Well, clearly, he's depicting the master as himself. Right? That he's going to return at some point. Now, there's 3 pervading truths that I think we need to understand. And ultimately what it will do is help us have the correct perspective over money and stuff and begin to set the table for us to handle money well. The first perspective is God owns it all. I mean, think about the master, right? Here you have the master. He gives his 5 talents to one servant, 2 talents to another, and 1 talent. Now, a talent was a sense of currency back in Jesus' time. There's a lot of discussion and debate exactly how much it was worth. One commentator says it's worth, if you worked your entire life, it's worth about half of your working life. So you work for 40 years, it's worth about 20 years of wages. That's a lot of money. Even the one talent is a lot of money. The master owns that. But do you realize in the story that the master owns a lot more than that? See, these are whose servants? His servants. When he gets back, the interest gained, the money gained is what? His interest. He invites them to enter into his joy. He gives the faithful good servants even more. So there's this pervading thing that the master owns everything in the story. Do you realize this is one of the central themes of Scripture? That God owns everything. So when we talk about how we handle our stuff, we need to gain perspective that it's not just our stuff he owns everything else. Think about this. God owns our time. The psalmist will say in Psalm 139, 13 through 16, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you. When I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth, you saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." What a beautiful picture. Here's the picture. God is caring for and protecting the womb. God is knitting that little one together, even inside of the mother's womb, that he oversees that, cares for that child. And before that child is ever born, before we ever lay actual eyes on the child, it says that every single day has been laid out in this book. So you and I right now, we are taking in breath. Why? Because the Lord even owns our lives, our time. That by his grace and mercy, right now, your heart is beating, my heart is beating. We're taking in oxygen, we're living right now. It's all a gift from him, and he has complete sovereignty over our life and our time. So the time that you and I are given, it's really the Lord's time. Talents and gifts. Romans 12:6 says this, "Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us." So in other words, God has uniquely wired you. He's uniquely wired me. We're different. We're good at different things. We're bad at different things. We're strong in certain areas of life. We're weak in certain areas of life. But where we find strength, where we find gifting, skill set, talent, that's a grace from God. Do you realize in your life there's a lot of things you don't choose and I don't choose? I mean, think about how much of your life you never chose. You never chose to be born into that family, right? We didn't get a choice over who our biological mother or father was. We didn't get that choice. We just simply entered into the world, and there, good or bad, there they were, our biological parents. We didn't get a chance to choose our socioeconomic status as we were growing up, the country that we were born in, our skin color. There's so much about our lives that we just simply do not choose. Many of the opportunities afforded to you and to me really had nothing to do with any great decision we made. It was just simply presented before us, and we took it. Your gifting and skill set is a gift from God. He owns all the talents, all the giftings, and he gives it to us in such a diverse way. One thing I know is you would never want me up here leading worship through music. You would never want that. I mean, you would have a difficult time really seeking the Lord if you heard my voice during worship. Well, praise God that these people can come up here and they can lead us through song and worship, and they got voices and they can play instruments. I mean, heck, John has 2 pianos. I don't even know what the second one's for, but we have 2 pianos. That's because he's gifted, right? He's got this talent. Whatever your gifting is, it is from the Lord and it is his. Our bodies, kind of mentioned this earlier. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 says this. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, from whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Wow. I mean, our bodies right now. Again, there's a lot of things we didn't choose in life. We didn't choose our build or stature, how we look. I mean, to a certain extent, right? Like you're looking up at me and you're like, hey, he's got a lot of gray. He needs to go get Just for Men and just do a little. I mean, I could do that. Right? But I didn't choose to have this kind of face. I didn't choose to have this stature. I didn't choose this skin color. Our bodies are even gifts from God. They're his. He just said, you're not your own. You're bought with a price. Honor God with your body. All of life is about God's ownership and sovereignty over everything. There's not one part of this world that he looks at and does not go, mine. No, every square inch he looks at and goes, mine, 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 mine. The psalmist says it this way, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. Everything is his. Now, we have this belief system that's really kind of in contradiction of this truth. Because we believe that we actually own things. Do you realize that ownership is just simply a myth? You and I actually own nothing. I mean, think about the house that you have. I mean, it may be completely paid off. Praise Jesus. You're working the Dave Ramsey thing. You're making it happen. You're free of debt. If that's you, praise God for that. But at some point in the future, do you realize that house will not be your house? It won't. You'll sell it. You'll move somewhere else. Maybe you'll pass. Somebody else will own it. Maybe one day it's going to be torn down. We own nothing, not even our homes. Think about the car you drive. The destiny of every car is the junkyard. Even the brand new car that you got right now that you're driving, at some point it will end up in the junkyard. Maybe it happens because you get into a wreck. I've had 2 cars that have been totaled in a wreck, right? And it's taken off to the junkyard. Paid for too, my goodness. Some point that car will not be yours. The clothes that we wear, if you're still growing, you will grow out of them. If you're an adult and you're still growing, you'll grow out of them. You'll be done with them. You'll want to wear something different, and so you'll take them down to the Salvation Army. At some point, even the bare necessities of life, like clothing, will no longer be ours. The money that we have is not truly ours. I mean, do you realize how money comes and it goes? John D. Rockefeller, often people think that he was the most rich man or the richest man to ever live in the modern era in America. After his death, somebody asked his accountant, so how much did he leave? And you know what the accountant said? All of it. All of it. You don't get to take it with you. You'll spend it now, it'll be taken from you now, or you'll leave it behind. Even the money that we have, it's all his. So the first perspective we need to have when it comes to money from this story is the master owns it all. God owns it all. And so if this is the case, then that means we look at it profoundly different, and I am just simply a steward. In other words, I am just a manager of what is God's. Here's truth number 2 that we see in here. The servants manage the master's property for the master's purposes. They didn't own anything. They didn't own the talents. They were given to them by the master, and they were called to invest it for the master's purposes. They weren't free to simply use it however they chose for selfish gain, for selfish reasons. Many people think that the unfaithful, slothful servant, he just simply dug a hole, threw it in there. They thought that that was quite a selfish act. Maybe he was trying to steal it or hide it from the master, thinking he would not come back. Now, you also see that there's a little bit of freedom in how they invested the money, right? We see that there's freedom in how they took their talent and invested it. But they still did it for the master's purposes, for the master's return. And have you thought about this? As you read this, you realize that one servant was given 5 talents. One was given 2. One was given 1. It says each was given according to their ability. That's really important. A talent in this time, one commentator said, could weigh anywhere from 58 pounds to 80 pounds. So the first servant must have worked out, right? I mean, he was able to get 5 of these things and carry them off. The other servant didn't have that ability. He could only have 2. The final servant didn't have that ability. He could only have 1. I see a lot of people not being great managers of what God has entrusted to them because they're looking over the fence going, yeah, but they got way more than me. Yeah, but they got a different talent. Yeah, they were more successful. They were given more opportunities. And they're always looking over the fence, pointing the finger, and they're like, yeah, if I had that, of course I would be faithful. Do you realize when the master came back, he did not require the 2-talent servant the same that he required of the 5-talent servant? God's not asking for all of us to be 5-talent servants. He's asking us to be faithful with whatever he has entrusted to us. I mean, it's pretty easy. You look at some people and you're like, oh my goodness, they're so gifted. They're so successful. I mean, they were kind of built for that. Look at them. I don't have that. I mean, look at my life. This parable reminds us that you're not supposed to look over the fence. You're just simply supposed to be faithful with whatever the Lord has entrusted to you. I think about the widow's mite here, right? I mean, Jesus, he takes his disciples and they're watching people put money into the treasury. And you have the really religious people, they're dropping money in, and it's a large amount of money. And then you have this poor little widow giving just her final penny. And Jesus goes, she's given more than all these other ones. Wait, she was being faithful with the little, and they were being unfaithful with a lot. You know, here's what I don't want you to hear, kind of a poverty theology. That if you're going to be a Christian, you need to be really poor. I don't read that in Scripture. I also don't read the other end of the spectrum where Jesus wants prosperity, financially speaking, for every person. I don't believe in the prosperity gospel. I believe that we are going to be faithful and righteous with whatever the Lord entrusts us. Some of you are rich, and the Lord is saying, I want you to be a faithful rich person. Some of you are poor, and he's like, I want you to be a faithful poor person. Whatever I've entrusted to you, just be faithful. Because if you're faithful with a little, then I'll know that you'll be faithful with a lot. And of course, we see the 5-talent servant. He makes 5 more, and he goes to the master. He's like, I made you 5 more. He's like, all right, you've been faithful with a little, and that was a lot of money. But now I'm going to give you real things to manage. I don't know what that looks like, but I imagine in his kingdom that if we've been faithful with worldly stuff, then he's going to put us over to lead, manage, and shepherd a whole lot more when his kingdom comes in full and complete order. You and I are called to manage whatever he's entrusted to us for his purposes. Your house, his purposes. Your car, his purposes. Your money, his purposes. Everything is his, and so we manage it for his good. You see one final truth. Here's the one final truth. The servants are all held accountable. The master returns. And he goes, okay, well, what did you do with the stuff that I entrusted to you? And of course, you have 2 faithful servants. So there's really only 2 categories. There's the faithful, and then there's the unfaithful. The 2 faithful, the 5-talent servant. Yes, you made 5 more. Well done, good and faithful servant. You used the stuff that I gave you for my kingdom, for my purposes. You were good and faithful. I'm putting you over much more. 2-talent servant. You came with 2 more. You were faithful with whatever I entrusted to you. Well done, good and faithful servant. I'll put you over more. But the final one did not use the talent, the treasure he had been entrusted with for the master's purposes. And just dug a hole and put it in there. He said, that's being unfaithful, slothful and wicked servant, and judgment came. All of us will give an account of how we use what God has entrusted to us. So I want to ask you 3 questions that I think will help us better understand how this really translates itself to our life. The first question is, what has the Lord entrusted to you? What has the Lord entrusted to you? Think about it more than just what's in the bank account. Think about, okay, my home, my car, my career. All of life is a stewardship. My time, my talents. What has God entrusted to you? And this is a really important question. Am I using the things entrusted to me for the owner's purposes? Am I using the things that have been entrusted to me? My success, my business, my money, my home, my car. Am I using this not for just selfish gain, but truly to help the kingdom come and his will be done? Last question, this is where the rubber meets the road. What are some ways you can practically show God's ownership in everything you have? God's ownership in everything you have. Let me just briefly take you through my life and how God has taught me so much about this. You know, when Heather and I, we got married and we were able to get our own place, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. And through a series of circumstances, one of our first places was just a little duplex that we lived in. We lived on one side of the duplex. And we had friends that needed a place to stay. And we were having our first child. So we're like, goodness gracious, we only have 3 rooms. It's really cramped. It's like 1,100 square feet. And we have this other family that needs a place to stay because they want to do something for the Lord. They were moving to be a part of a church plant. And so we just reached the conclusion that, okay, even this little duplex, I feel like the 1-talent servant right now, but you still call me to be faithful. And they came and they stayed with us. They helped plant a church. Over the years, we've had various people come and live with us because they were in various seasons of life, stages of life. But I've come to realize my home is not mine. It is the Lord's. A few years back, I had a teacher call me, and she was really upset. She's like, I don't know what to do. My car just broke down. I literally have no way to get to work each and every day. At the time, we had 2 kids, so we were a family of 4, and we had 2 cars. I go, oh, this is easy. I got a solution. We'll be a 1-car family for the next couple weeks until you get up enough money and you get it repaired. You just take my car. It's yours. So for the next 2 weeks, she drove it. And it wasn't easy, right? I mean, when you make that sacrifice, literally some days I was riding my bike to work, and I'm not kidding. But I had come to realize that car is not my car, it's the Lord's. Of course, over the years, God's taught me about finances. It's not my stuff, it's all his. And so how do I use whatever he's entrusted to me for his kingdom, for his glory, for his purposes? So what ways can you show that God owns everything in your life? Complete and total ownership of God's, and you're using it for his purposes. You know, I feel a great deal of relief Ownership can be a very weighty thing. The more you own, the greater the demand and the weight. But you know what's incredibly freeing is to know that he owns it all. And I can just simply rest in that and manage it accordingly. An incredibly freeing truth. Here's good news. Here's really great news. First, some bad news. None of us have been completely faithful with what God has entrusted to us. In many ways, you and I should identify more with the one talent servant than the other servants, myself included. That we've taken what God's entrusted to us, our time, our talents, our treasure, our house, our car, and we've just used it for self. We've kind of taken this and just hid it, and we've not used it for the master's purposes. Really, in this story, we should identify with that servant. But there's really great news. There's one who perfectly and completely used every second given for the Father. There's one that used every resource imaginable, even his own life, for the glory of the Father, and that is Jesus. He used every time, every talent, every treasure for the Father. Completely obedient, a perfect and faithful steward. And then he died on the cross. And why would a perfect steward die? Why would a perfect servant die? Well, he died because you and I have mismanaged what's been entrusted to us. And he paid the price for our mismanagement so that you and I can be forgiven. So that you and I can be reconciled back to God. So that when the Father looks at us, he sees the perfection of Jesus. He goes, well done, my good and faithful servant. Isn't that incredible news? I know in a message like this, there's a lot of people that can feel guilt and shame. I just haven't been great with what you've entrusted to me. Good news, Jesus forgives all. And now he says, go and sin no more. You free person, free from the debt, the spiritual debt you owe. Now go and live as a changed person. And thus, we live as changed people. I'm going to give you a moment just to pray. I don't know how the Lord's impressing his word onto your heart, but I know he doesn't stop stirring and moving. So I'm going to give you just a moment. Everybody bow their head. And however the Lord's stirring, I'm just going to allow you to kind of do business with the Lord right now and pray.